8-bit retro shmups can be a tricky thing to appreciate in an age where heavy parallax 3D and HD visuals are mainstays that have been around for a very long time. As far as the simple shooters go, high-numbered, pirated multicarts on the NES were always a great place to get a bunch of the Famicom's earliest shooting games in one place.
B-Wings, also known as Battle Wings, is just one such game. Released by Data East in Japanese arcades in 1984 with a Famicom port, B-Wings was a pretty obscure game even then, but also quite an innovative one for being as early a game as it is.
Being released in 1986, B-Wings is actually not as basic as you might think. Your ship has standard 8-way movement, and while your vertical movement is what you might expect, horizontal movement will scroll the stage indefinitely in the direction you move. Static elements will repeat in this fashion as well. The effect that this has is that your ship is more or less centered on the screen at all times, which is actually pretty nifty, if maybe just a tiny bit disorienting at times, but easy to overcome.
B-Wings has an assortment of 10 wings available from the outset of the game, and each has a different attack pattern associated with it. Cannon is a fast-firing, concentrated forward attack. Wide fire is a group of 5 shots that spread towards the end of the playfield. Multi cycles through the multiple angles of attack, and Van is a limited range, 6-shot barrier-style attack.
Side fires a group of 3 shots both left and right in addition to a small forward-firing shot. Anti fires backwards and forwards. Hammer fires powerful projectiles with a rolling shield. Jump has a projectile that can pierce solid barriers. Dyna has a wide blade with high power and limited range. And finally, Fire is a powerful flamethrower. While B-Wings doesn't have an auto-fire function without a turbo-switch controller, each weapon still has a unique fire rate associated with it, mapped to the A button.
When your ship gets hit by an enemy shot, your wings will be destroyed and fall away from the ship's core. If it's hit again with no wings equipped, you lose a life. It's also possible to eject your wings with the B button, which allows your ship to dive as a defense measure. There will be times that some of the barriers you'll encounter can't be destroyed and your dive is all you have to get through. But more wings can still be found throughout the stages. Some need to be freed from their transporters, others cycled through in a special pickup.
Some of the weapons in the stages that you'll be playing through are needed for the best score payout though. Do you lose your powerful forward shot for a side shot or rear shot? Or power through like you are? As such, some experience and tactical thinking could be required to get the highest scores. In addition, every 4 stages you'll be able to choose the weapon of your choice from the original 10, just in case you happen to have lost the power-up you had to begin with. Other cool special weapons can be discovered in specific spots as well. These weapons are typically insanely powerful, and can make short work of, well, everything. Handy since B-Wings has an astounding 30 stages, which is actually 15 less than its arcade predecessor.
There's plenty to play here though, which can sometimes feel a bit on the monotonous side given the more or less samey stages beyond their color, but it's otherwise not too bad. The controls feel good and solid, and the stages aren't especially long, with diverse enemies, enemy patterns, and some pretty creative bosses, despite most just being a robot-esque shape with a bunch of junk to destroy on them. Every now and again you'll come up against a freaky animal of some sort as well, just to freshen things up. There's also an alternating 2-player mode and even a continue system should you lose all of your lives.
All in all, B-Wings gameplay is as solid as it is creative and innovative, especially for 1986. But what about its scoring? B-Wings is a very, very basic game when it comes down to its scoring. It all basically boils down to destroying as much as you can throughout the stage you're playing through.
Outside of the odd pickup like umbrellas and such, that's all there really is to it. Thankfully, there's a fairly generous extend score to continue your efforts if you happen to die. Just don't expect anything technical.
Like its scoring, the presentation that B-Wings boasts isn't especially fantastic. The visuals do their job well enough though, with fairly clear sprites and very little flicker. The backgrounds have good visual cues that let you know where you are, and the different colors behind them are a nice subtle touch, if a bit cheap.
The sprites are distinct, if a bit on the weird side. The physical barriers in the first stage look like enormous missiles, and others can be equally strange. But still, they do the job and, if anything, really make B-Wings quite a unique game visually, if repetitive.
The sound effects are mostly great, with the exception of the hammer sound, which could have been a little less high-pitched. It all still works though, despite a lot of repeat sound effects for explosions, especially versus the bosses.
The music is pretty great on the whole as well. The boss theme is a little iffy, but the main themes for when you have wings equipped and even for when your ship is bare are well composed and super catchy. Not bad at all. It's just too bad there's so little music in the game.
B-Wings, on the whole, is quite a solid game with some great concepts, even if the game can drag a bit with its 30 samey stages. But how does it stack up? Let's take a look. Fairly sharp and responsive with a neat centered perspective, B-Wings is not a bad controlling game at all.
It might take a few sessions to resist pressing B when trying to fire, though.
There will be some super tricky parts throughout this game, so while the enemies might be tame, it'll take a lot of experience to see the end for sure.
Without a bit of patience, B-Wings can be a little frustrating.
The stages here aren't especially challenging, but at 30 stages, this game is long.
This is definitely a game that will take a very long time to see the end of, even in one sitting.
Visually, B-Wings is solid, but a bit repetitive.
Even so, B-Wings does come off as very bland, but unique.
With B-Wings music, what's here is pretty amazing, but once again, really repetitive.
The music is pretty fun and catchy, and the sound effects still do their job.
With the dive mechanic and the 13 different weapons throughout this game, B-Wings did some truly great stuff in 1986. It's just a shame that, at a glance, it seems so repetitive.
Even for such an early game, B-Wings did a lot to make it a different experience with a level of choice rarely seen in even today's shooters.
Though not as many people might know of its very existence, B-Wings did a lot for shooting games so very long ago. Few, if any, games at the time offered the amount of choice that B-Wings had, though with repetitive samey graphics, repetitive sound, and being a very obscure game, the first that Data East would publish on the Famicom. Perhaps its innovations were dismissed before they could be experienced, but in the end, B-Wings is a super fun game despite its shortcomings. One that I've played for decades and will likely play for decades more. B-Wings gets a 4 out of 5. Getting a copy of B-Wings is as easy as it is affordable. It can typically be had at auction, cartridge only, for about $7, and often more depending on completeness. If you have a Famicom or an NES with a game converter handy, checking B-Wings out is definitely something worth doing.